might say that as I grew up, I did not have any special interest in literature. I am not American born. I am an American by choice. And I'm happy, glad, and proud. Had I been American born, I would be a teacher of English because I love it. Love literature. I can speak of that freely, for it was not always so. Oh, how I hated Browning. I had to wade through him and get a grade in it. But I said to myself, I had Browning in class. I'll send him home that he might learn how to write so anybody could understand it. Poetry was an abomination to me. Not until one day in Chicago University, which I was attending, and the teacher put a sentence on the board, did I begin to wake up. I still remember that sentence. He wrote, "How sweet the moonlight sleeps upon this bank." And I said to myself, that's some more poetry. Why didn't he say what he meant? He's going to say that the moon is shining. Now just say that and be done with it. The teacher evidently could read my mind, for he said, now some of you will think he should say the moon is shining. He could say that, but that wouldn't be poetry. It wouldn't be literature. He would say the moon is shining sweetly. That'd be silly. But when he said how sweet the moonlight sleeps, and he had a delightful lisp, sleeps upon this bank. How sweet the moonlight sleeps upon this bank. A picture rose before my mind, and I began to see what I had never seen before. I said to myself, am I losing out on something? Is there really something in literature that I haven't? I had never wanted to lose out on things. It always appeared to me that things didn't happen where I was. They happened everywhere else. In those days, I had a bicycle. And when the fire department came by, the fire engine, horses in those days, I'd chase them. I was going to see something now. But a moment after they came, they put the fire out. Now that is no way to do. As I had chased them a mile to see a real fire. Nothing ever happened where I was. That's how I felt. Well now, as I came then to literature, as I came to poetry, my reactions to begin with were what I said. But from that moment, when the teacher wrote that on the blackboard, I began to wake up. And the result was that I changed my major and majored in English. How I loved that Desire of Ages. I had been given the work in school of finding and noting all the immortal lines in Shakespeare. I did. I found all I could find, of course, and many of them good. Then I decided I'd find all the immortal lines in Desire of Ages. And because of my ignorance, probably, I found more than I did in Shakespeare. I took a course in the university in the life of Christ, and I chose as my outside reading that book, Desire of Ages. And now I had occasion to go through it carefully, critically, from the theological viewpoint. I knew that Mrs. White did not have a very broad education. That was not the rule in those days. My father finished 3 grades in school. Those that are real well off would finish 8 grades, but not common people. Sister White did not have a very liberal education, and as I read Desire of Ages, I knew within myself that she had never written that book. She couldn't. Full, rounded periods. Excellent expression. All the way through that which spoke of a very high training. And Sister White did not have that. Hence, I drew the conclusion, Sister White did not write it. And when in the university I went through the book from a theological viewpoint, I knew again that she could never have written it. Because there was theology there that only one who had had a very broad education in theology could ever write. So I was convinced that she had never written Desire of Ages. After a while, when I was sent out to teach, I said, before I go out, I must know. I will not deceive, and I will not be deceived. If there's something in these volumes more than I think I want to know. And so, I came out here to California, where Sister White was living at that time, to see her, talk with her, and find out whether I could. I knocked on the door and said just about what a student said to me in Union College when he came. Said, here I am, what are you going to do about it? I didn't use those words, but that's what I meant. She looked at me and took me in. I told her what I wanted. I said, I'm not interested in what you have written that's published, all that I have read. But I am interested in reading what you wrote before anybody got hold of it to correct it and edit it. She looked at me. What do you want? I want to have permission to go over the manuscripts as they were written originally before anybody touched them. We talked some more, and I was given that permission. I was given permission to go into the vault, fireproof vault, where all the writings were kept. I was astonished as I came in to see the work before me. For there was shelf after shelf of manuscripts, written, not typed. Sister White wrote with her own hand most of what you know, what you have read. She did dictate, but not very often. Ordinarily, she'd write it out with her own hand. And when I saw the writing, I said, here I have a work to do. Because while the writing was legible, not very beautiful, it wasn't any better than my own handwriting. I can read the first page I write. I can read page 8. And I challenge anybody else to read it. I couldn't read Sister White's. Just an ordinary hand. There would be misspellings once in a while. Not very often. I don't think any more often than my own. But I began work. I had help. I can read, could read and can read reasonably fast. That can be learned, by the way. Whatever your age. Always in Union College, in the senior class, college class, we had a class in reading. Can 16th grade students not read? Oh, yes. Some spell their way through and some can read faster, but almost all can greatly improve their speed and their capacity for understanding. You'd say if you read fast you forget. No, you can learn. But that's beside the point. I read. I had help. I had brought with me quotations from her books, quotations which I knew she had never written. I brought them with me to check out. I wanted to see how they were originally, not after the typists or the stenographers or the proofreaders had fixed it up, but as she wrote it. I got the manuscript. And I testify here that as I read through, every quotation I had along from her books was there in writing before me in her own hand, not manipulated, as she wrote it. I was astonished, because I knew she hadn't written it. And then she had. I spent 3 months going through the manuscripts, copying some, and reading. And when I was done, I was profoundly convinced that I could not account for those writings only on the basis of divine guidance. I spent practically every morning with Sister White alone. She sat in her rocking chair. She had a rocking chair with a board across on the arms, and there she's sitting right. I'd be there 6 and 5 and one morning at 4. She was writing. She'd write 6, 8, 10, 20 pages. Then she'd hand them back to the typist, who would copy them on the typewriter, double or sometimes triple space. She'd ask me to read what she had written, or she would tell me what she had written, and then we'd discuss. I was anxious to find out what kind of mind she had. I was examining her, poor youngster that I was. I suppose she was examining me instead of, but I didn't know that. And I asked all kinds of questions, wise and otherwise. Sometimes she would answer them. Sometimes she would say, my mind does not run along that line today. Sometimes she would say, to my astonishment, I don't know any more about that than you do. What? She had written it, there it was. I don't know any more about that than you do. Let's read it. Then I found out that she had to study her own writings as prophets did of old. Peter speaks of those prophets that had to search their own writings, what manner of time the spirit which was in them did signify. They didn't know. And so we studied together. We had some very pleasant mornings. Sister White, kind mother in Israel, with a fine sense of humor. That perplexed me. I remember when I first heard Sister White laugh. Oh no, she ought not to laugh. But she did. Just a human being, a mother in Israel, one you could love and feel at home with. When I first came into her office, I looked about, saw her office furniture, and I said to myself, when I get a little better acquainted with her, I'll tell her that she ought to get some new furniture. Her home, neat, clean. A New England home, that's where she came from. A New England home in California. But her office furniture were antiquated from before the war. I mean the war between the states. And she needed some new furniture. One day she gave me an opportunity. Do you think I'm extravagant? She said. I know. I was sure she wasn't. Well, a sister came in yesterday. She looked at my rocking chair. Then she rebuked me for being extravagant. Now, she said, I bought that rocking chair for $8 second-hand. And it's very comfortable. You don't think I'm extravagant? I certainly don't. Then I told her a story. The one I just read, which at that time was written, 50 years or more, no, 100 years previous. The latter part of the 19th century, about 1790, is the story of a Methodist couple. These youngsters, for wedding present, had been so unhappy as to receive a rocking chair. A rocking chair for a wedding present. You say, what's wrong about that? Well, rocking chairs in those days were uncommon. They were not used. They were an extravagance. And they were wicked. To sit in a rocking chair and rock back and forth and not get anywhere, that is of the devil. And now, these two youngsters had a rocking chair. So the good Methodist elders, this is the story I told Sister White, appointed a committee, about like Adventists would do, to see these two, find out whether it's really true that they did have a rocking chair, and then what to do about it. And so the elders reported. We went there. We found that they had a rocking chair. We labored with them. We prayed with them. And when we left, the rockers were taking off the rocking chair, and the chair stood on four legs as a good Christian chair ought to stand. Then Sister White laughed. We have advanced so much in the last 100 years, we can hardly conceive of how things were back there. Rocking chairs wrong? Well, everything wrong was new. It is heretical. It is wicked. And you better not use it. Brother White was so unfortunate once to bring to camp meeting a bed spring. Now, bed springs were new in those days. In olden days, we slept on rope beds. Some of you may not know about that at all. Take two pieces of timber and wind ropes around it. That is your spring. Does anybody here, by the way, know anything of this? Heard of it? Yes, there are hands there, yes. Then we also had slats and straw cheeks. And those slats are very good if they're not too far apart. Then you would sleep this way. But now somebody invented a bed spring. Not the spiral spring we now have, but this that goes this way, and you sleep this way. Well, Brother White brought a bed spring to camp meeting. He shouldn't have done that. That is heretical. That is wicked. That is extravagant. So the brethren went to see him. Now he is president of the General Conference. But the bed spring, that is just too much. They found out that he had a bed spring, but the poor man escaped any censure by saying that Sister White was not well and needed a bed spring to sleep on. So he escaped. But he didn't bring the bed spring anymore. He had learned his lesson. Those were the good old days we speak of. They were not always so good. When I was done in my work in the vault, those 3 months, there was one place where Willie would not let me in. Willie was the son. Not a young man, an old man even in those days. He said, no one has ever read that. That's for the family only. That's the family documents. I couldn't let you read them. So I went to Sister White, and like a little boy would say, Willie won't let me in. were in the vault. Then I told what I wanted. Says, you may go in. So I went back to Willie, and then he gave a reply that I remembered ever since. I don't doubt what you say, but I don't believe it. Now, if you can make that out. So both of us went to Sister White, and she gave permission, and Willie unwillingly let me in. There I read the family documents, way back to before 44, written by a girl, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, and not written for publication. She did not have in mind that 50, 60, 70 years later, some youngster would come along and read them. They're for the family only. They wrote letters in those days, not just a few lines, 10, 15, 20 pages. They were real letters. So was Sister White. She wrote to her parents, she wrote to James, she wrote to others. She would put as a heading, Dear, or I said, Dear James. Yesterday, I went downtown and bought 8 yards of calico. I'm going to make myself a dress. With that beginning, she'd go on, and you'd think it a sermon. You could put it on the front page of the Review today. You wouldn't need to attach any name. All Adventists of any years of experience say that's Sister White. The same note, the same phraseology, the same seriousness. She might write, I went down to the dentist yesterday. I didn't know if they had dentists in those days, but apparently they did. And then again would come this long letter, or epistle, or sermon. As I think back of it, back on it, I do not know that those that received the letters got very much information of the family, but they did of things of the Spirit. I think that I'm perhaps the only one now living that ever read those letters, because there are no more. They belong to the family. Perhaps I shouldn't have read them. But as I think back of it now, I'm glad I did. I saw that the same spirit in those early letters as in the latter epistles. When I left, I asked Sister White, may I have some of your writings in your handwriting? Yes. Not very many did I get in their own handwritings, but I got thousands of pages of typewritten copies of them, so much so that when I left, I had 2 bundles of 8.5 by 11 double-spaced thin paper, about 2.5 feet tall. If I had been as old as I am now, I wouldn't have dared to take that much. But he said, you can take anything of which there are 2 copies. And I took them. And I left profoundly convinced that I could explain those writings only on the ground of divine guidance. Years went by. I was asked to teach in the, what we now call the seminary. Then the Advanced Bible School. I said I'd be glad to do so if I had the privilege once more of going over carefully and critically all the writings of Sister White. For I repeat what I said before, I'll not be deceived, nor will it deceive anybody. I must know. And being older, and presumably having a little more sense, that may be doubted, I could go over critically, and I did. I spent 3 summers with help going over critically. If I were to teach teachers and that is my work, and teach ministers, then I must know firsthand. And when I was done, again I say, and that's my testimony, I was profoundly convinced that God had something to do with those writings. God had everything to do with them. Not that they are a new Bible. They're not. The Bible and the Bible only. That's the creed of the Protestants. As Luther said, placing his hand on the Bible, here I stand. I can do no other. God helping me. And there I stand today. But, as Sister White says, these writings are given as a magnifying glass. You use a magnifying glass. You do not see that which is not there. But that which you could not see now is revealed because of the magnifying glass. It's not a new addition. Nothing is added by the glass. But you see more. And so those writings are given us for our instruction and learning. As we near the harbor, we need a pilot. Even the captain takes a pilot aboard. And we are nearing the harbor. And those books can be neglected only at great cost, perhaps even cost of salvation. For God has given them to us, and we are to read them and study them, not to displace the Bible. I say that again and again. For I'm not worshiping Sister White. I'm not preaching Sister White. I preach Christ. I preach the Bible. That I must do. I can do no other. But, having said that, let me say again, let me repeat, that we can neglect those writings only at the peril of our soul. Are there not things that are hard to explain in them? Yes. Some ask me, do you understand all? No, I don't. Sister White didn't. What to do then? I have learned now long ago that there are many things I don't know, and that I simply have to say I don't know. That was kind of hard for me to begin with. Here I was a teacher. I had a degree or two. I knew all things. And then somebody asked me a question. I must answer it. Then I found out I didn't have to answer. That I could say, I don't know. And that's good for the soul, to be able to say that. I don't know. What do? I have a compartment up in my brain here where I put things that I used to worry about. I'd find something I couldn't understand. I'd just worry my head off. Then I found that I could put them up here, as it were, to soak. And after a while, I might understand. But I found that as I put up one question and got out one question, sometimes I could put in 10 questions and get out only one. So that compartment is getting larger and larger of things I don't know. But I learned not to explain things I don't know. And that's a blessing. I'd advise you to get that kind of compartment too. Instead of worrying about things that you don't understand, put them up here, and something may happen. Have you ever had this experience? I know you have. You say, what was his name now? I forget it. What was his name? Do you remember? No. Do you? No. Well, all right, let it go. So let it go. But an hour from then, or next day, or even a week, here comes that name. Somebody did something while you were asleep, unrolled the scroll until it got back to what you want to know. And so even with certain hard questions, you can put them in soak, and they'll come out, some of them, when you need them. That's for your information. Well, are there things hard to understand? Yes. I had my troubles. I have them. But I learned not to worry about them. I take by faith. And by faith I believe, and then I wait until the answer comes. I remember how worried I was about health reform. I lived up to all that is written in the law and the prophets. And I came almost to the time where I didn't dare eat anything. I was so afraid I might eat something that I shouldn't. I canvassed. That's good for the soul. Took it out Monday morning, knock on the door, and have somebody come from the wash tub and tell you what she thinks of you. You're being put in your place. And some of us need it. I did not eat any place, eat with anyone at any time. I was very careful in my eating. And I'll explain to you how and what I did. I read in the testimony this thing, that thing, and the other. And I believed it all and did it all. I bear definite testimony against, then come, of course, meat, milk, butter, eggs, so forth here. Well, I better quit. So I quit this thing. I quit the other thing. I kept on quitting. I want to make sure if there's any way of getting to heaven, I was going to get there. When I canvassed, I ate granola only. Now, please don't blame Sister White now for this. That is not her teaching. That is my interpretation, not what she said. Well, now, I ate granola. Some of you don't know what that is. Granola is a cereal, or rather 4, 5, 6 cereals blended together, baked, and then crushed, so it looks just like crumbs. But it's good stuff. I like it. I was going to say I love it. Still, I ate that and that only. Then I knew I was safe. Then I wouldn't be transgressing any. Now, I repeat now, this is not Sister White's teaching, but my perversion of it. I ate granola and water. I carried my granola with me. By the way, may I ask, does anybody know what granola is here? Oh, yes, quite a few hands. Crumbs, but good crumbs. So I ate that and drank water. I had to be careful not to eat too much because that granola had a tendency to swell. And then it wasn't so good. So I canvassed, sold books, and ate my granola. But after a few weeks, that got to be rather tiresome. Granola and water. I wonder if God would frown on me if I bought some raisins and added the raisins to the granola. I did. And oh, heaven nearly came then. Granola, raisins, and water. But after a while, my conscience smote me. Perhaps I'm extravagant. Perhaps I ought not to use raisins, so I gave them up and went back to granola and water. Now, I should have died, but I didn't. I prospered. I grew fat. Don't get the idea that granola was poor food. It's excellent food, wholesome. I was canvassing in Illinois, and one day I was sitting outside Joliet prison, and on the other side of the road sat a man selling pineapples. And oh, how I loved pineapples, but they're properly wicked. But I wonder if God would do something very bad to me if I did buy a pineapple. So I bought one and ate it all. And the acid had the effect of taking the skin off my mouth. Now I knew that it was wicked. That is God's punishment for eating pineapples. And I went back to granola again. Then I read something, and now I quote in Sister White, where she says this, speaking about people, you eat altogether too much. Now, that statement is true. It is true now as was true then. Generally speaking, we eat too much. Do you agree with that? Yeah. Some of you are dieting. You might as well give that up. It'll come back again. No. That is good stuff. And I was not eating too much. But there I read in her books, you eat too much. I took that to myself. I eat too much. I ate only twice a day. And not very much, just a little plate and a little granola and water. But there said, you eat too much. Well, believing all that's written, I could do only one thing. Cut that in two. I did. Now I was clear. No, I wasn't. Because when I opened the book again, it said, you eat too much. What could I do now? Cut it in two once more. Then I saw the foolishness of that. I didn't have any sense. That did not apply to me. I was taking that statement and making an application to me when it applied in dinner. And I learned there a valuable lesson, that in reading the testimonies, I must use the sense God has given me. I tell you, that lesson has stood me in good stead. I can read and it's still there. Still there. You eat altogether too much. I say, Lord, that's true. But not for me. I can say that honestly. Oh, I don't know if I could say it now or not, but I could then at least, because I was not eating too much. Let me repeat. That lesson has stood me in good stead. I may not take that statement or any other statement by itself and forget the connection and the time in which it was written. I must use the sense God has given me. And if you do that, you will find valuable information in health reform and along every line in the righteous Sister White. Milk. At a camp meeting here, somebody came to me. Do you drink milk? I do. Then you don't believe the testimonies. And I said, isn't that nice weather today? Isn't that statement about milk? There certainly is. There certainly. And that statement, remember, is just as true today as it's ever been, but under like conditions. What I shall describe now, I wonder if any of you know what I'm talking about, what I'm now going to say. We used to milk cows that are not particularly clean. They had been where they'd become unclean, but we milked them. And we milked them with unwashed hands. And there we sat milking, and the milk running down, a pure white streak, and down in the pail. Have you ever seen that? Then we took the milk and put it in bottles. And when we got it home and bottled and it stood for a while, at the bottom, there'd be an eighth of an inch or a quarter of an inch of real filth. And I'm afraid if that had been analyzed, it wouldn't show up so good. But we poured out the milk as much as we dared pour out so as not to get that filth along. Now, does anybody know what I'm talking about? Sure. I bear positive testimony against that milk. Don't drink it. That's good sense. That's good sense. I was on Sumatra, not so many, just a few years ago, 5, and there I saw that kind of milk. And I saw that clean white streak. And I saw those bottles. Here is where that applies. I bear positive testimony against milk. Then, when things were changed, when cows were washed and examined, and health certificate given, and there was a pasteurization, and every bit of cleanliness that could be gotten was used. Then we were told we might use it. So the time might come again when we may not. Now, there you'll find a contradiction. We may or we may not. Both are not true. Don't put Sister White against Sister White. She spoke rightly. Don't use it. And said, we may use it. And I sat at her table, because that doesn't make any difference what she did. She's not my example. But there, milk was used. I said that's nothing. Cheese. Cheese should never enter the human stomach. Is there such a statement? Oh, yes. Yes, there is. Well, then, don't you ever buy any cheese. Well, now, wait a moment. Wait a moment. I was present among the group that went to see Sister White when we translated it into German. Sister White, we Germans are using cheese. It's one of our great means of subsistence. I did not have reference to that kind of cheese. And so that is omitted from the German edition. It did not apply. But I have seen, and I can see now places where it does apply. My father was brought up in the old country, in Norway. Good country. He told me how they used milk and cheese. I better not attempt to describe it, how they did it. But I do think that the process could be a little bit improved. For when the cheese was done, it would walk. Do you get the point? It tasted good. I loved it. But I'm afraid that it wasn't quite up to standard. And cheese made from the kind of milk that I have spoken of here, better leave that alone. You'll find, as you read Sister White, sound counsel, sensible counsel, if you follow it. There are those that reject the counsel entirely. There are those that go to the other extreme. Use the sense God has given you. Read, study, pray, and believe. And whatever you read, you may know that that statement is true. Here's a statement about the Laodicean church. The last church. Is it very flattering? I'll spew thee out unless you repent. Well, now, however much we repent, that statement will remain in the Bible. And some are using it. Down in Texas, where we have where there is a group of some who were once with us, but now not ours anymore. And they read that statement to me. That statement is true. That statement is true. But the time will come, the time is now when we are repenting, and it'll no longer be true. Where God's approval will rest upon his people. I saw them. That's the next step. On the sea of glass. There they stand, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing. In their mouths are found no guile. The two contrasts. Now, that about standing on a sea of glass does not apply now. We haven't got there yet. But the time will come when God will have a clean church. Now, I said all that I intend to say today. Much more might be said. I'm glad I can bear my testimony, though in the next breath I'd say I'm rather reticent about doing it, because I have no intention of living in the past, or merely be asked to speak because I'm old. And there are very few that have had experiences that I've had. I'd rather present the truth as it is in Christ right now, but for the sake of some that have never known or experienced anything about the righteousness of Sister White, somebody ought to say what I have said today. And so will you take it as it's meant? Counsel to you and me to come back to, if you have been away from, the writings given us for this time, which we are to read and which we are to follow.